Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Stemmer. I'm an intellectual property attorney and the founder of Stemmer Law, a law firm focused on all things copyrights and trademarks. We can be found at stemmerlaw.com. So over the years, I've worked with a lot of non-US companies who are in the process of breaking into the United States market and want to protect their trademark rights first. As a trademark attorney, I absolutely approve of this safe order of operations, but editorializing aside, I have noticed a very few specific questions and curiosities that tend to come up on repeat because certain things in the US when it comes to trademark law are just different than anywhere else. It has created such a good learning curve that I was inspired to make a video outlining these differences to help the process of breaking into the US market a bit easier. So let's dive right in, starting with the big ones. Number one, the United States use in commerce requirement. So trademark offices in most countries have a use requirement, but it is a dormant requirement. The way it works is that you can have and maintain your registration without proving to the trademark office that your trademark is in use. Non-use can come up if a third party files what's called a non-use cancellation against you, where someone comes along and tells that trademark office, hey, these people aren't using their registration, it should be canceled. And then that process initiates. So as you can see, the requirement is there, but it kind of hangs out in the background. Now, the United States, on the other hand, has a very active use requirement. The United States Patent and Trademark Office, or USPTO, checks for use of your trademark in the United States commerce and has very specific requirements for what that looks like. In fact, the USPTO will not grant registration of a trademark to a U.S. company filing a national application until they are able to show the office that the trademark is in use. Now, there is an exception for use prior to registration for non-U.S. companies if they meet certain requirements, which is important for this. So stay tuned for more information on that. The USPTO also requires a showing of use at periodic maintenance and renewal filings. And occasionally, in response to those filings, they take it one step further and issue random audits where they require additional proof of use. The audit process also does come up a lot for non-US companies in this context, so I'm going to talk about that a bit later as well. So number two, the class identifications. For those who are new to trademark law and don't know what a class identification is, every trademark application requires a description of the goods and services that will be offered or are offered under the trademark. Every good and service falls under a certain category called an international class. Like Class 25 is apparel, and the goods within Class 25 apparel are hats, shirts, pants, etc. So we call that description the class ID. While years ago, via international treaty, most countries agreed on a standardized list of classes, the United States also agreed, but does go about the wording of the class IDs a little differently, especially in light of the very strict use in commerce requirements. So for U.S. trademark applications, the only goods or services that should be in your ID are the ones that your company sells or plans to sell using your trademark. What I have noticed from non-U.S. companies is they will include a lot more in their class ID than they should. For example, years ago, I worked with an international hotel chain based in Europe, and we used their European application to form the basis of their U.S. application. More on the reason why we do that is in the next point, so stay tuned if that was something you keyed in on. So, but in their identification, they listed every single product that their trademark was printed on. And if you've ever been to a hotel, their trademark appears on a lot of things, like the chocolates, the pen, the notepad, the room service menu, and even the telephone. And these are things that the hotel does not offer for sale to consumers. So under U.S. trademark law, they are not in use in U.S. commerce. To secure trademark rights in the U.S., your trademark must be used on your goods or services at some kind of point of sale. It is not sufficient that the trademark is used at the invoice stage. It needs to be what consumers look at and make their initial purchasing decision. A lot of times, the non-U.S. application is filed to the U.S., And it's just an oversight that gets sorted during the maintenance filing, and that's when they delete the goods and services that they don't need. But sometimes filing applications for goods or services that your company actually doesn't offer can be a waste of money because U.S. application fees are calculated per class. Now, I mentioned earlier how audits can create additional challenges for non-U.S. companies. After 5 years of registration in the U.S., a lot of companies are quite surprised when they come to realize that they actually need to prove use of their trademark, and sometimes they don't realize just how serious the USPTO is about their use requirement. If a maintenance or renewal is filed, it must be filed only for the goods or services that meet the U.S. use requirement, because the USPTO might issue that audit in response to your filing. If you are not able to prove use in the audit of some goods and services that you included in your maintenance and renewal filing, there is a fee levied, and that can really add up. I also have noticed that the US PTO tends to issue more audits on non-US companies, I think because they have realized that non-US companies do not always understand the US use rules. So it's best to be extra careful if you're coming from a non-US country. Number 3, my recommendation for the order of operations. I mentioned earlier that U.S. companies who file a U.S. national application will have to prove use prior to being qualified for registration, and that this is not the case for some non-U.S. companies. If qualified, the non-U.S. company will not have to show use until 6 years into registration. In order to get this benefit, the non-U.S. company would either have to file an application to the U.S. through the World Intellectual Property Office, or WIPO, or an application directly to the United States using a subsection 66A filing basis. To file under either one of these, you will have to have a non-U.S. application or registration first. One downside is that the U.S. application, including the class ID, will need to be based on the non-U.S. one, which can create some limits if you plan to offer different goods or services in the U.S. Being able to show use later down the line is a huge benefit, because every business owner knows that there can be so many unanticipated delays. Well, I hope this has been helpful and shed some light on the process and makes breaking into the U.S. market a little less intimidating. If you need additional support, we can be found at stemmerlaw.com.